Let's see if this works. Here, let's do this. Okay. Are you all seeing something that says at the top, falling in love with Leviticus, and in tiny print, session 4?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So we can, here we go. So we are still exploring the first verse of Vayikra, of the book of Leviticus, and the ways that the rabbis make meaning of what it means, that it says, Vayikra el Moshe, Vayedaber Hashem elav me'ohel moed lemor. Hashem called Vayikra to Moshe and spoke, Vayedaber, to him from the tent of meeting, Ohel Moed, saying, lemor. And we just have today and tomorrow left in this series. And so what we're doing today is we're looking at a kind of representative sample of several midrashim that are exploring the theme of what makes Moshe unique among prophets and so special as a prophet. The kind of remaining themes in this book are around what makes Moshe so precious and the relationship between Moshe and other Jewish prophets. We'll see a bit of one of the midrashim we're going to look at looks at that, and the relationship between Jewish prophets and non-Jewish prophets, and then focusing on this phrase in our pasuk from the Ohel Moed, where it also talks about how special the Ohel Moed is, and how if other nations knew about the Ohel Moed, every nation would want an Ohel Moed. And we also will get to explore a bit on the Ohel Moed next week in our final class in this series. Welcome, Bev. So glad you're here. Okay, so before we go into our first pasuk, our first midrash, we'll just see one of the psukim that it's relating to, which is this one from Mishle, Proverbs, where it gives us, this is from our wisdom literature, it gives us something that feels on the one hand kind of intuitive and also that's meant to be communicating something important nonetheless. It says, Al titadar lifnei melech uvimkom gdolim al ta'amod. Do not exalt yourself in the king's presence, and do not stand in the place of nobles. And the language uvimkom gdolim, in the place of nobles, can mean literally in the place of, or it can be instead of. And so in a way, there's already a kind of suggestion within that language of like, when we're standing in the place of great ones, does that mean something only about what we're doing, or is there also, is that a limited spot such that you're taking someone's place when you're in that spot? And then it goes on to say, Ki tov amar lecha alehena. It's better for people to say to you, come up here, mehashpilcha lifnei nadiv, than for you to be kind of lowered or degraded, told to go to a lower place, but in the presence of the great, asher ro'anacha, that your eyes have seen.
Step up here. Then to be.
Was that a question, Charlotte?
No, I'm just getting it in my head.
Okay, great. It'll come up again in our midrash, but it's just a kind of basic frame of like, it's better to be told, come be bigger, than to be told like, go.
Yeah.
I also just want to name, I actually feel that this particular teaching, I'm not sure it makes sense for it to be kind of taught the same across different personality types or even different genders. The sense of like the assumption that people want to be like standing up front is definitely not true for all people. And I'm not sure it's good for all people to be told, don't make yourself too great. But nonetheless, it's there in Mishle, and this midrash relates to it, and sensitively, I think. Okay, we're going to come back to this pasuk from Tehillim in a minute. Okay, here we go. Rabbi Yoshua of Sichnin, in the name of Rabbi Levi, opens the verse, for it is better to be told, step up here, alehena, me'ashpilcha lifnei nadiv. The purple is our original pasuk. And Rabbi Akiva taught about this sorry, the English is missing that this is Rabbi Akiva talking. Rabbi Akiva teaches about this in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Azai. Go 2 or 3 seats back and sit there until they tell you to come forward. So this is referencing the structure, the style of seating in the Batei Midrash of old. There were 8 rows, and the front row would be the people who were kind of like the most esteemed learners. And this is telling you, like, go back a couple rows from where you think you should be and wait until they tell you to come forward. Don't come up so that they tell you to go back. It's better that they say to you, come up, rather than say to you, go down. And at first read of this, I actually don't know that this is adding so much to the pasuk itself. This feels like it's basically saying the same thing that the pasuk said. I think it's doing, one thing it's doing is it's bringing it explicitly into a conversation about the Beit Midrash. Val, do you have a thought on what it's doing here? Or a question?
No, go ahead with your story and then I will add something to it.
Okay, great. I just noticed the other thing that comes up here is a doubling, that there's something that becomes emphatic. Like if you, where it says come up, or go down, that's one of the changes that comes from where the pasuk itself just says it once. And so here there seems to be something of you don't, or it's that there's going to be something emphatic, something, when language is repeated in Hebrew, generally we understand it to be emphatic. So it's imagining you want them to like really pull you forward, or really, but not really push you back. Val, what are you noticing?
I think this is really good advice for a lot of situations. When my kids when we joined a synagogue in the Boston area, and my kids were starting Hebrew school, and I went, so I sat in the main congregation. I thought, oh, I want to be up close. And we didn't get too far in the service when I realized that, oh, I don't know the customs of this place. So if you're in a new synagogue, it's sort of nice to be able to look out and say, oh, does everyone stand up at this point? Or are some people doing it? I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing. And so sometimes it's good to step back and gain understanding of the culture.
So already there, you're hearing this sense of sitting back as a way of allowing yourself to take in. It's a kind of honoring of what's there, witnessing what's there, that when we're kind of rushing forward, that we're already putting ourselves in a position of being seen or shaping the culture potentially even. And this is saying that there's a wisdom in letting in what's there. Thank you. And this moves next to a moment from Hillel, who says, Hashpalati hi hagbahati. My lowliness is my elevation, or my elevatedness. Hagbahati hi hashpalati. My elevatedness is my lowliness. And he gives his explanation for it. Matam, what's the reason? Hamagbihi lashavet hamashpili lirot. And here he quotes from Tehillim. This is also in Halal. Hamagbili lashavet hamashpili lirot vashamayim va'aretz. Who is like God? And here it reads as enthroned on. I mean, this translation of the pasuk, I think from JPS, is the one who's enthroned on high sees what's below. But the midrash seems to be reading it with a kind of attention to the one who is up high will sit. Hamagbili la shavet is actually an infinitive verb, as if it's saying the one who's up high is going to be forced to sit, is going to be kind of pushed down or made to sit. Hamashpili, the one who is low, lirot, will see. And here it's almost like usually we think of the person who can see is the one who's up high. They have a view of what's around them. And so there's something kind of inverse of our expectations of what becomes possible or what's going to happen in each of these positions. And it's suggesting, he's suggesting based on this pasuk, that the one who's low down is really the one who can see, or really the one who has the kind of elevated maybe consciousness. I'm not sure if for him, if he's talking about status. I'm actually curious to hear from people. I guess I'll just say one more word about this word shafal, and then curious to hear whether you think this is about ego or something else when it's talking about this like upwardness, elevation, how much is about status, how much it's about something else, a kind of internal quality. I'll just say about hashpalati that this word shefel means lowliness. And if you think of in the Hodu Hagadol, one of the tefillot, one of the Tehillim that we sing as part of Shabbat and holiday mornings, in Pesukei Zimra, we have the sign Shabishif Lenu Zachar Lanu. In our lowliness, you remembered us, which is to suggest, or maybe it's even Zechar Lanu, that like a command or a request that you remember us. I don't remember if it's past tense or future tense there. But the kind of assumption is that when we're in this low place, there's a presumption of being forgotten by God, and it's quite remarkable. It's something worth singing about, to be remembered when we're in this low place. So I want to open now to this question of whether you think this is about ego or something else, what you think it might be illuminating for us to bring our attention to this dance of the low and the high. For folks without your video on, I don't see you. So just pop in.
So how would this relate to the phrases that are used now about up power and down power?
Will you say another word about those phrases?
They're sort of new to me. My understanding is that everyone operates in different kinds of power dynamics. So if you have a boss, then you would relate to him in a way, or her, that would show a level of respect that you might not speak. You might speak to them differently than you would, and more carefully than you would somebody who was either a colleague or someone who worked for you, and you had certain expectations of them and what their role is.
Mm-hmm. So maybe, I wonder, I don't know with up power and down power to what extent that says something about our own kind of state of awareness or not, but just hearing you bring that in, Val, for me felt, I'm imagining this Hillel teaching about him talking about my own lowliness is my elevatedness, that maybe there's a way in which when Hillel has an awareness of, I don't know if it's up power or down power, but of having a boss, of God beyond even the most renowned rabbi. Hillel is really like one of the core rabbis for us. That there's a kind of lowliness that comes with that awareness of having a boss that actually opens a kind of elevated experience of having an awareness of our own lowliness in relationship to God. It's actually one of my favorite teachings on the nature of Moshe's humility is that Moshe knew he was great and amazing among people, but he was focused on himself relative to God and God's total abundance. And that's what kept him in the most humble attitude of anyone. That's what made him the most humble of all people, was that his awareness was always toward the divine. Thank you for that. Let's go into the next part of this midrash, which we can decide together how it relates to the first part. So here it says, you find that in the moment when God revealed God's self to Moshe from within the bush, it says in the Torah that God reveals God's self to Moshe, and immediately, it's like in the same pasuk as God saying, I am God, Moshe covers his face. So Moshe covers his face, and it brings the quote from chapter 3 in Shemot, Vayaster Moshe panav, Moshe covers his face. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God says to Moshe, Lecha v'shlachacha el Paro, that somehow it's connecting this Moshe covering Moshe's face with God saying, come and send my people. So come and I'm going to send you to Paro. So here there's, it seems to be casting this within the lowering and elevating. Moshe lowers himself by covering his face, and God elevates Moshe by saying, you are the one I'm going to send to do this. And the midrash picks up on, you'll see I highlighted and read here, the midrash picks up on a kind of strange textual moment where there's a hey at the end of this word. We know when God says to Abraham, lech lecha, it's just spelled lamed chaf. That word lech and lecha, both are just spelled lamed chaf. And here we have a hey at the end of this word. And the midrash reads that to be the hey is singling Moshe out. Said Rabbi Elazar, the letter hey at the end of the word signifies, if you will not deliver them, no one else will deliver them. Moshe is covering Moshe's face, and God is saying it has to be you.
And with Lech Lecha, that's at the beginning of Abraham's journey, and he's Avram at the time. He hasn't received his hay yet.
Beautiful. Moshe gets his hay up front, the beginning of his calling. Love that. And then it moves us into staying with this same rhythm with Moshe. Bayam amad lo min hatzad, va'amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So this is taking us to, so we were at the moment of the bush and God telling Moshe, you are going to be the one to redeem the people. And now it moves us to the sea, where Moshe is amad lo min hatzad, which can mean Moshe stood to the side. Or I think we could also read it as God stood at Moshe's side and said to him, Amar lo Kadosh Baruch Hu, V'ata harem et matcha uvka'ehu. You raise your staff over the water and it will split. And here, the midrash, again, I've highlighted in red, is picking up on this sense of something extra in the language, because we know in Hebrew, you don't have to say you. It's just built into the words. God could have just said, Harem et matcha uvka'ehu. Raise your staff and the water will split. But God is saying, Ata harem et matcha. You raise your staff. And Midrash goes on to say, Lamar she'im ein ata bok'o, ein acher bok'o. To say, if you don't split the water, no one else is going to split it. Again, B'Sinai. So we got across the sea and then we got to the moment of revelation. B'Sinai, amad lo min hatzad. He's standing to the side, or God is standing next to him. Amar lo, aleh el Hashem. God says to Moshe, come up to God. Lamar she'im ein ata oleh, ein acher oleh. To say, if you don't come up, no one else is coming up. Which is kind of a wild, this fits within the broader picture of Revelation where Moshe needs to go up and get the Torah. And at the same time, the precise pasuk that it's quoting says, "Ve'el Moshe Amar alei el Hashem ata ve'Aharon Nadav ve'Avihu v'shivim miziknei Yisrael b'shachavit merachok." We actually saw this pasuk quoted in the midrash we looked at last week, where there it was in the midrash about if a king comes into his city and there's the person who provides food and the head soldier and the head of whatever else, how do we know which of them the king prefers? The one who he turns to first and talks to. And here and there, it was saying, God tells all of these people, Atah, Moshe, and Aaron, and Nadav, and Avihu, how do we know which one God likes the most? Vayikra Hashem el Moshe. God calls to Moshe. That's how we know who among them God actually feels the most intimacy with. And here, the midrash seems to be reading the pasuk almost in the opposite direction of Atah singling out Moshe. Moshe is the one who's spoken to in second person. You are the one who has to come up on Sinai so that the Torah can be given. If you don't come up, no one else is coming up. But Ohel Moed, and now we're coming to our moment just before Vayikra. The Ohel Moed was filled with God's presence. And it says here, Ohel Moed amad lo min hatzad. Again, Moshe is standing to the side. Or again, God is right beside Moshe whispering to him. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ad matai ata mashpil atzmacha. Ein hasha'a mitzapeh ela lecha. God says to Moshe at the Ohel Moed, where God wants Moshe to come in, right before Vayikra, how long are you going to lower yourself? The moment is waiting for you and you alone. And here we get the kind of total subversion of the mashpil atzmacha, where for Hillel, that was his glory. Here God is like, enough, Moshe. Stop making yourself small. You have work to do.
I remember that one thing that Alan taught us was that part of humbleness is knowing you're really knowing who you are and where your place is, whether it's high or low or medium. And finding the right place is the correct thing for humbleness.
Mm. And tell us, yes, beautiful, beautiful. This fits so nicely with that offering. I think he even said it's about filling your place. It's about knowing your place and filling it. Will you say your next
Yes.
your next thought, Charlotte, on how you see that in conversation with this?
Well, this is I think a whole look at understanding what our purpose is at the moment, and what's expected of us and what we can give, but also not being brash and thinking we're more than we are, but accepting the fact that in certain situations it's appropriate to, as Valerie said, to be a little bit lower, and in certain situations one has to take the lead, and that's what Moshe was to do, was to take the lead and not be shy about his place. And so it's both psychological and something else. I don't know what the other word would be. The psychological is knowing about yourself, and the other is accepting the role that you have to play, I guess I would say, and accepting it in not feeling inappropriate, but knowing that it's perfectly appropriate for you to go forward and to take the lead, or it's perfectly appropriate for you to let others be in charge and for you to set back. Does that fit?
Yes, beautifully. I'm trying to just take it in. I love it feels to me like that kind of clarity comes with a great deal of trust. It's so interesting to imagine, Like, what internal experience do the rabbis have that they are describing for Moshe as God saying to Moshe, come do this thing? Because we know that these are all part of Moshe's calling. And I guess I find myself feeling curious, how do we learn from this about what our calling is, about hearing it in order to accept it? Like maybe there's a listening for an intuitive voice or a God standing beside us and whispering or demanding, this is it. You have to do this. If you don't do it, no one else is going to do it. But that real moment to moment sensitivity you're talking about is very moving to me. The midrash ends with saying, "Tid'a lecha shehu ken, shemikulam lo kara hadibur ela leMoshe." Know that it's like this, that out of everyone, and again, we had this once before, the name it uses for God is Hadibur, the speech, is called only to Moshe, Vayikra el Moshe. And I think on the one hand, we have this invitation from this chapter in Vayikra Rabba to be really wondering, like, wow, Moshe was so amazing. How can I imagine and understand Moshe better? And at the same time, I think we have the invitation of what can we learn from Moshe to radiate into our lives of how we listen, how we act.
Yeah, Hannah, you've got a hand up there. I don't know if you noticed.
I don't see it. Thank you.
Ellie?
Yeah, Ali, please. Thank you, Val.
Oh, hi, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to comment about what you were previously saying about the whole rising up and you're being called to do something and all of that. And it reminds me of being a high school teacher. And when kids like don't understand or really don't honor their potential and they don't share and they don't engage because they're shy or what have you, and having this feeling of like, it's not just about you, like other people like need to hear this and all of that kind of stuff. And I was thinking about the humility word and how, with dissolving the ego, I was kind of thinking of like the word selflessness and how being humble is a selfless thing. But then Moshe is also being asked to be selfless in terms of stepping up. So it's like this kind of double selflessness of being humble, covering his face, etc. But then also being selfless there's a selflessness in his standing up and rising up for the sake of everybody else. And so I think it's interesting that like with knowing his place, it's still a selfless thing. And he doesn't need to feel like, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I love one of the things that coming to mind for me is one of the words for ego in modern Hebrew is anochiyut, which means like selfless. And you're using this language of selflessness, and it feels to me like it's landing so strongly on what ego is or concerns about self, and the idea that it's, if we kind of equated with like, yeah, it's like when I have a big activated ego, I guess we're not really looking at that side of it. We're looking at what happens when we don't have a big activated ego. I guess when the ego is lowered, it allows us to act on behalf of other people. And maybe even there's something you're pointing to, which is, I think this is what feels so nuanced about the ego piece, is like, actually, there's a way that we can make ourselves small because the ego is big, or because we are concerned that what we offer wouldn't be precious enough, that we keep ourselves small. Or the kind of insecurity you're talking about with these high school students, where there's something, I guess, of like that we can make ourselves small and thus cut off actually things that are really important that we need to be contributing. I guess I don't know exactly how to map it onto the large and small, but it feels like it rings so true with this, with the making ourselves small and the dimensions of selflessness that can allow for elevation. I think it's quite amazing, kind of as opposed to like Mordecai saying to Esther, maybe this is the moment you came to Malchut, and if not, like if you don't act, Sahala will come to the Jews, redemption will come to the Jews from somewhere else. But don't think that you and your family will be saved, but redemption will come to the Jews from somewhere else. This is not that message. This is like, there's something that if you don't do it, it's not going to happen. And it's necessary. This also evoked, I was learning this midrash with my chavruta Sari Horovitz, and she said, this really reminds me of Shmuel saying to Shaul, the king of the Jews, when Shaul kills all of the Amalekites except for their king, after the commandment to wipe out all of the Amalekites, Shmuel says to him, Im katon ata be'enecha. Are you not making yourself small in your own eyes? Or are you not small in your own eyes? But you are the head of the tribes of Israel, and God has anointed you to be king and sent you on a mission. But you didn't do it because you're small in your own eyes. And how that own self-perceived smallness is basically the end of Shaul, that he stops being able to do his work in the world when he doesn't identify with his potential and responsibility. The second midrash that I wanted to look at together today goes in a bit of a different direction. I guess I'll give one more moment just to ask if there are any other comments that people want to share before we jump into a different teaching.
It's about balance, I guess, is what I just really want to sum it up as. The balance between exaggerating who we are inappropriately versus knowing when feeling the humbleness, which says, this is my place, and filling it out fully. And if one can fully fill out who they are, then it isn't a problem. But people who take on either exaggerated lowliness or exaggerated highness are not being helpful to themselves or others. And so it's sort of what I got out of the whole thing. I don't know if that's full enough, but that's how I put it together. It's a struggle for people, I think, finding their place in life and feeling comfortable and grateful for where they are and embracing it rather than showing off or I just saw the little note that was
I know,
there.
Bev, that's great. Bev, come up here, come up. Thank you.
I think about this dynamic of doubt and discernment. And, being able to know when to step up. And you have, in Genesis, you have spectacular dysfunctional families. Over here, we're dealing with Moshe, Miriam, Aaron's sons, Korach is a cousin. These are the jealousies that come up, the not knowing what the boundaries are because it's such a new territory. It's a whole new paradigm, and people are trying to work it out. And some of them are saying, but what about me? I mean, aren't we all holy? And other people saying, oh, I'm not good enough. So I think it's kind of human.
Very human. There's one more thing that I guess I feel curious to carry with me from, Charlotte, you pointed to this kind of like moment to moment attention. Maybe that's something you said, Val. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering. But how there's kind of like an ongoing attention to what the appropriate response is or what the appropriate action is. And I do feel curious about to what extent it can be helpful for us to think about actions as opposed to just a kind of status, like what row you're sitting in seems to me to be about status, whereas Moshe's hesitations are about, am I really the one to do this? And God over and over again is like, yes, you are the one to do this. Like, this is an action that it's required of you. And I wonder if that can offer something to us in how we think about how we relate to ego, to selflessness, and to orient around, even as a possibility of orienting around action and our potential and responsibility for action, as opposed to status alone. I'll share one more midrash now. Oh, here we go. Can you guys see now the Moshe versus other Jewish prophets? Or are you seeing something about Gior? Are you seeing? Do you see like yellow and green highlighting?
Yellow.
No, there's some yellow highlighting. We've got Vayikra Rabba 110.
110. Okay, you're in the wrong place. That's funny. I'm sorry. I would think this far into Zoom world, this would feel easier for me, but. Okay, here we go. We're learning Vayikra Rabba 110 next week, but today we get to learn 1:9. Okay. Now you're seeing one that says Moshe versus other Jewish prophets at the top?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is just, as I mentioned, this is kind of representative of many of the midrashim in this chapter that are dealing with why Moshe, what makes Moshe so singular. And this one I think just has a kind of sweetness to it. So it starts again with quoting our pasuk, Vayikra el Moshe, and it says, but didn't God also call out to Adam? Didn't it use the language Vayikra Hashem Elohim El HaAdam in Bereshit? And then it says, it's not bad or undignified for a king to talk with his sharecropper, with the person who's taking care of his garden. So here it's saying like, yeah, also use the same language of we just gave you a gazillion midrashim about how important we know Moshe is because it used the language of Vayikra Hashem El Moshe. But it's like also God calls out Vayikra El Adam, and that's okay because he has a special relationship with Adam. Adam has a function, it's taking care of the earth, the steward of the earth. And then it says, it quotes Vayedaber Hashem Elav, which is the next part of our pasuk in Vayikra, and says, didn't God also speak Vayedaber to Noach? And then quotes Vayedaber Elohim El Noach from the flood story and says, Ela ein ganai lemelech ledaber im nakdodo. It's not undignified for a king to talk with his herdsman, the person who takes care of his animals, which is like Noach is the one who gets all of the animals onto the ark and protects and cares for them. And then it goes on and says, Vayikra Moshe. Oh, sorry. Vayikra Moshe Ula Avraham lo kara. Didn't God also call to Avraham? And quoting from the Akedah, Vayikra Malach Hashem el Avraham, that an angel of God called out to Avraham. It's not undignified for a king to speak with his innkeeper, the person who runs the inn where he's staying.
There's a difference when God calls versus you use the word listen when you said about Moshe in the previous thing. And there's a significance on that. Because if God's calling out, he's maybe giving instructions versus, I don't know if I'm on the, I'm sure there's a difference between the two and a meaningfulness. I'm just guessing what the difference might be. And so there's something to think about and talk about maybe. But the listening somehow meant that Moses really needed to take in and accept what he was hearing versus saying, where are you? Where are you? Somebody says. So there's something deeper. There's something deeper about listening with all your being. So I offer that for some other people to comment on.
It's beautiful. This particular midrash, you can share. You'll see if you think it's going in the direction of listening or what it's doing. But what you are doing, Charlotte, is exactly the kind of attention that midrash brings to text. You're reading it as a love letter. You're saying these words are different. Doesn't that have a different resonance? And we know that God loves that Moshe listens to him. So is that going to make what the speaking, is that going to change what it is for God to be speaking to Moshe versus speaking to Noach or speaking to Adam or even to Abraham? And so this midrash locally goes on to clarify, but it wasn't God who called out to Abraham there. It was a malach. It was an angel who called out to Abraham there when telling Abraham not to sacrifice. So there's a way that it's kind of breaking down. It's like, well, it was a little different in that case. V'ramhacha amar Rabbi Avin amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, ani hu hakore ve'ani hamedaber. And this is coming to what you were saying, Charlotte, of like, well, it's using the word speak and the word call. And here it's saying for Moshe, it was both the word call and the word speak in the same sentence. That God is calling and speaking, doing both of those ways of reaching out to Moshe. And so here it does pull on something you're noticing also in how it ties together what makes Moshe singular, that he's able to be spoken and called to, or God chooses to do that in one place. I'm tempted to look at one more midrash that's in this vein, and I also want to give us time to write. So what I'm going to do is save this next midrash for our time together next week. The next midrash is still in this thread of Moshe as prophet, and what his potential is, what his strengths are, and so we'll come in with that next week. And for now, I'll invite you to get out your pen and paper if you have that with you, or you can use a new document on your computer. And I will dictate a piece of the text and invite you to write down what you hear. Ali, welcome back. We're just about to do a little dictation and some time for writing to kind of let in what this learning has been. It's nice to see you, Ali. So getting out your pens. So I'll read this phrase in Hebrew also. Amadlo min hatzad. He stood to the side. Or God stood at his side. And said, Ad matai ata mashpil atzmacha. Until when, for how long will you lower yourself? The moment waits for you alone. So we'll take 3 minutes now just for writing, harvesting whatever insight comes through you in response to this piece and what we've learned today. Inviting you to wrap up the thought you're writing. Okay. Um, I'd love to hear your harvestings of how this resonates with you. Yeah, Ali, please.
Thanks. So, I was thinking about how having low self-esteem is not what humility is. And in this book that I'm reading, they mention in Judaism how every single person is the whole world. If you help one person, you're helping the whole world. And that all of us come down here with a unique gift and something to give, and that's God's work. And it's something that is unique, and that what I have to give isn't what somebody else has to give. And so if we play it small and we're not like stepping up into what we're being called for, we're keeping our gift from the whole world and from benefiting people and all of that. And so stepping up with our offering is God's work, and not doing that is denying God. And that, like, it's similar in the sense of Moshe not stepping up to save this giant group of people, but it's the same if you think about it like how each person is the whole world, that we're not sharing our gift to. So I'll just, yeah, that's what I wrote.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm thinking the meaning that it has for today. I didn't write on that at all. And I summed up everything by meaning it's meant to be and accept it. But what I'm looking at it politically today, when things are, there's, say, a rise in anti-Semitism, it isn't the time to be quiet and say, well, what can one person do? It's the time to say, I do matter, and I can speak up, and I have a purpose, and I can be helpful by doing so, rather than just standing back and letting prejudices, whether it's against us or anyone else, be said. So that this can be utilized for today very easily, I think.
Mm.
We
Thank
each
you.
have a responsibility, instead of thinking of ourselves as too insignificant. We each have a responsibility to rise to the occasion, and the time is now. If not now, when?
Mhm. It
Notice
does
that
feel like
it's
it's like connecting opportunity and responsibility in a big way.
because I wrote about Tikkun Olam. How do you repair the world? If you don't speak up, nobody knows what to repair.
Mm.
You know what I mean? It's water. It's so many issues we have around ourselves, and we are not doing enough. We have to speak up,
Mm.
you know, and we don't do enough of that in our society.
So you're pointing to that, even it feels so beautifully tied into the power of speech in general in this piece.
Exactly.
There's also speech can also be action.
Exactly. And if you don't speak, you have to act. What counts is your action. It's not your speech.
Hmm.
So with speech, you have to act, and you have to act in all means you have, in all ways you have. That's what I look at it. I wrote about Tikkun Olam in general, because there are so many issues that we don't do enough. For example, I have a problem in my building when I read now about garbage. And I talked to someone this morning, why we don't separate the garbage? You know what I mean? This is also Tikkun Olam, you know? So we don't do enough of that. We don't speak and we don't act enough.
Thank you. Val, do you have a poem you'd like to share?
Sure. It's a little rough. They say it is a sacred place, but there is no time to take off my shoes. Searching for a moment of discernment to act in this moment.
Thank you.
I mean,
I'll share my Make yourself small, sit further back, stand to the side, she said, to the part that thinks there must be someone more perfect for her calling. Thank you all so much for joining together to learn Torah together. May our learning be for the merit of healing and wellness, and wishing us each clarity and acceptance of our next actions that are called for. Thank you.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you for having such a sensitive session.
Thank God. Next week is our last week. I hopefully get to learn with you again. Bye, you all. Thank you.